this is our HIPAA and database breach panel. And we are lucky today to have with us three gentlemen who are going to give us their insights. They have experience in this area. John Dildy, who's the Assistant General Counsel for Lamico, the leading provider of medical professional liability insurance in Louisiana. They insure approximately 8,000 healthcare providers and entities, physicians, nurses, hospitals. John is a graduate of Tulane Law School and received a Master's of Laws in Health Law from Loyola University, Chicago, and a Master of Laws in Business Transactions from the University of Alabama. Welcome, John. We have to my left here, Graham Bradshaw. Graham is the Director of Compliance at LCMC Health. He's an attorney, approximately 10 years experience in the intersection of healthcare laws and regulations. Was raised in Vero Beach and claims he's an excellent golfer. Earned his BS at Florida State and his JD here at Loyola with a certificate in health law and compliance, and serves as a Director of Compliance, as I said, for LCMC Health, a 6-hospital system situated in the greater New Orleans area. He has responsibilities for Turo, EJ, in Jefferson Parish, New Orleans East Hospital. Graham's primary area of expertise includes reviewing physician compensation agreements, physician space leases, hardware leases, Epic, Community Connect agreements. For those in the healthcare space, I think you know who Epic is, as well as drafting the business associate agreements. So Graham has extensive experience in the areas of the Stark and the anti-kickback, HIPAA, EMTALA, and FWA. Welcome, Graham. And we also have Ralph Abruzzo to the far left. Ralph is the Program Director, Senior Professor of Practice Information Technology at Tulane School of Professional Advancement. He's the Director of that, where he focuses on keeping learning delivery in the information technology curriculum on pace with cutting-edge technology, security, and industry advancement. He holds the title of Senior Professor of Practice. He created and delivered the first graduate and undergraduate cybersecurity courses at Tulane in 2011 and is taught in both the Homeland Security and Information Technology programs, a nationally recognized subject matter expert on technology in those areas, and he served as director-level leadership positions for technology systems integration companies for over 15 years, and has consulted on multiple federal, state, and local jurisdictions to successfully guide the development, deployment, and adoption of IT systems for security and public safety. So welcome, Ralph. Okay, so our first question is, I asked for a one-word open, HIPAA today. We'll start with Graham.
All right, I'm going to cheat a little and use 2 words. What's really pertinent to me is business associates. In our organization, we have roughly over 7,500 agreements, current agreements, and we really strive to make sure we have current BAAs in place with our business associates to make sure we're indemnified in the event of a breach. But with the span of 7,500 agreements, it is very difficult to capture that. But that is a big area of risk for healthcare organizations that have multiple hospitals with various contracts with vendors whose relationships may have evolved over the term of our long span term of time. So that's one area that's really pertinent to me.
Thank you, Graham. John?
Commonplace. HIPAA is mainstream in that if you look at the regulatory environment, a lot of the state laws that have been enacted over the last few years actually mimic HIPAA. And so for our company, which is an intersection of both healthcare and insurance, so we're regulated by the insurance department in Louisiana. The state has recently adopted a law called the Insurance Data Security Law that, if you read it, it looks a lot like HIPAA. So you're going to see that in 15 states so far and many more, depending on who your regulator is. So, we're under both regimes, HIPAA and state.
Thank you, John. And may I ask the technical, would it be better for them to just use the 2 mics and pass them? Yeah, why don't we get rid of this? Okay, so, and Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah,
Your
so-
one word, yep.
That's to weigh in on that. So HIPAA is viewed at the university in my programs as a regulation that impacts technology operations, whether it's cybersecurity operations, information technology operations, as it drives governance. So we ensure that our courses bake in the necessary governance and leadership to produce students that are capable of existing in this environment. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to speak to that.
Great, and we have sort of the topics up here. We're going to hold all the Q&A to the end, if that's okay with everybody, because there's really a lot to cover. We could spend a whole day talking about HIPAA easily. Okay, so let's start with the first item, COVID-driven impacts, right? We've been still in some ways COVID, right? So COVID, Ralph, you want to start with that one?
Sure. To no one's surprise, COVID forced everybody to distance working online in a hurry. And I think a great job was done. We took this workforce and we moved it into people's houses and we moved it into people's vacation houses and so on and so forth. And it was done rapidly. But, you know, as someone told me years ago, hey, Ralph, would you like it done quickly or would you like it done right? Because you can only have one of those. So in moving online practically overnight, what you can imagine is IT departments struggling to get online in competition with everyone else. My competitor has got their workforce up and running. They're all distance now. I better get up and running. So what you see is that the usual due diligence necessary before changing a large part of your infrastructure in many cases was half done or half-baked if you prefer. So what ports were open, what systems were introduced that weren't tested in the environment. Basically, this type of quick move engenders security issues. And COVID in particular, we saw a major impact, as my fellow presenters will be talking about, a major impact to the healthcare industry. Well, along with that, you have cybersecurity threats that pivoted to take advantage of this situation. So with that, I'll pass it over to John.
Absolutely, and you know we had to really buckle up and assist our insureds. We have about 8,000, as Ray had mentioned. So we had a lot of questions and things coming in hot and heavy, and I think we dealt with it pretty well. I can't speak to every aspect of the technology of it in compliance-wise, but I think overall, looking back, we dealt with it and adjusted pretty well.
Yeah, COVID definitely hit healthcare pretty hard. And to Ralph's point, you know, if you want something done fast or you don't want it done right, that really resonates with me. My last organization, we were given a week's notice that if we had an LSU employed provider at our facilities, they would no longer be able to see patients face-to-face, meaning we would have to pivot to telehealth, which gave us a week to implement a telehealth operational system when we had nothing prior to that. So we had to do that. We had to rush and do it fast so we could still meet the needs of our patients and remain operational to keep the lights on and everyone employed. So we did have to implement this telehealth program very quickly, and obviously there were some inherent vulnerabilities that we had to work out on the back end, but thankfully we were not impacted and we were able to continue to see our patients.
At the same time that this move was made, again, you had actors taking advantage of the situation. You saw a large increase. In fact, I think it was March of 2020, the Attorney General directed all U.S. attorneys to find and prosecute people who were taking advantage of the situation, committing crimes based on the COVID situation. Part of that was obviously cyber, and part of that involved not only selling phony tests and phony whatever, but it also involved people attacking the system, which they knew was in transition. And it also involved, when attacking these systems, they could have attacked them to get PII or HIPAA data, but they also could have attacked it to get intellectual property, healthcare intellectual property, by hopping through systems that you've violated. So I think that's important to note, is that at this which the transition was great. We managed to keep the economy going during this terrible time, but this is the dark side of that.
All right, so moving on, let's hit the next one, and this sort of brings it back to a local episode. The UMC, the medical center over there on Tulane Avenue, right, and a Russia hack database example, the HIPAA view, the security view, and we'll start with Graham for this one.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, if you live in the area, you may recall it was late 2020, there was a media notification that LSU Health Sciences had experienced a data breach. They had a long-term employee who clicked on a malicious phishing link and had their emails accessed. And in those emails, there were patients from roughly 6 hospitals, one of them being UMC. The patients during that time were actually patients of interim LSU Health. However, the breach kind of fell to us because LSU ran to the OCR right when they were notified and listed these were the hospitals that were affected. A lot of these documents involved rev cycle review documents, billing and coding, charts for quality reviews. So there was everything. We had Excel spreadsheets, just PDFs, and we had to recruit our IT forensics team to actually, help us understand what the universe of the impacted patients were, because, this data was not readily accessible. So we were just south of 20,000 patients. So that was pretty scary for me to hear, because that was the first time I've dealt with a breach of that magnitude. We were able to be in contact with our OCR investigator. This was over 500 patients, so we had to notify the media. And under HIPAA, we have the duty to notify all the impacted patients. So like I just said, it was just south of 20,000 patients. I have 6 people on my team. That was a tall task. We actually had to retain an outside vendor that helped us with our mailing and notifying our patients. So those all went out. We received our notice, our request for review from the from our OCR investigator. We actually passed with flying colors. We provided our policies and procedures, our evidence of training our employees, all of our risk mitigation measures in place, thanks to our IT security team that do great work and ongoing tests on our employees to make sure that we are well trained. So after roughly a year, they closed out our case and found that we had handled the situation perfectly, and we were assessed no penalties or fines. So that was a big sigh of relief, because when we were dealing with 20,000 patients, the fines get rather large very quickly, and those are tough conversations to have with your CFOs when they're budgeting for the next calendar year, and you go to them and say, do we need to set aside $1 million? We really can't tell you. It's all dependent upon what the OCR finds. So that was just a local example of a HIPAA breach, and thankfully we were able to pass with flying colors and not be assessed with any fines or penalties.
Great. John, any comments on that?
We were speaking briefly about the problem they had, and it's very important that you go back to your offices, if you are a business associate or a covered entity, to review your business associate agreement or agreements, because oftentimes the other party will insert things into it to make it into a full-blown contract, and you do not want to get into the situation that they were in and not be aware of what might or not apply with a breach. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that at all?
So yes, we did have, this was with LSU Health Sciences. We have a long relationship with them, and it was discovered that that business associate agreement hadn't been updated in quite some time to what our standard language pertains and contains, which would have had far stronger indemnification language, which would have put the burden on LSU Health Sciences to actually provide the notice to our patients, the impacted patients. I neglected to mention that as a result of that breach, this was over 500 patients, we were put on the OCRs, they call it the wall of shame, and you can literally Google it. And until your case is resolved by the OCR, you remain on that website. So we were very thankful to have that taken down. Additionally, we had to feature our breach letter to all of our patients prominently on our website. So that was not popular with marketing. So we were very happy to be able to pull that down because we had to meet our alternative notice requirement under HIPAA as well.
Ralph?
Well, yeah, just to take note of the due diligence that needed to be proved post-hack. And we know on the legal side that there's pretty good, there should be pretty good documentation and due diligence. But on the IT side, are you funding your IT people to the point where they could be part of a capability maturity process to get continually better and to document and show? If you can't document and prove it, then it didn't happen. So in terms of due diligence, you're going to need to show that in case of a hack. So are you funding your IT group to the point where they can do the due diligence necessary to not only take the necessary steps, preventive steps to be hacked, but also to prove afterwards that they took those steps according to best practice, according to NIST, according to other best practice that's out there, because this is what you're going to be held to. And increasingly, what's seen as due diligence, that's not a line, that moves. So as time goes by, the due diligence you were expected to have taken becomes more stringent. And so I think we're seeing that on a continual basis. So that governance and that documentation of due diligence is critical. And one other point, they may have injected funds to pivot to the online, to pivot to distance worker, injected funds initially, but since in most places, people haven't come completely back. So they're out there working at distance. Has IT operations been funded to support a completely different work structure than was in January of that year? So basically, has your IT management and cybersecurity management changed enough to indicate the situation you now manage, which is 80% of your employees working remote or some number like that? And we know businesses save money on the office space, turning it into swing space and having people work from home, but that money needed to go into ensuring that your IT operations and cybersecurity operations were properly structured for a largely remote workforce.
All right. Yeah, there's nothing more. A hack is frustrating and anxious enough, much less than you do all the right things, but then you can't prove it because you don't have the right doc. That is totally frustrating, right?
Ray, I'll go back
ahead,
and
Grant.
touch on Ralph's point about documenting your diligence. This is a little outside my wheelhouse, but as a result of this, we had our IT security team launch ongoing phishing email campaigns to our own employees. So if you do click on the link that you've won a trip to the Bahamas, we actually give each employee a risk score. So the more times you fail, you are assigned more trainings before you get out of this risk category. So that was one risk mitigation measure that the OCR really found favorable.
And I would just add, if you were here for Mr. Sylvester's presentation, the gentleman from Gallagher, those several slides he put up, you need to really pay attention to those, get a copy of them, because I can tell you, I feel I'm involved enough with our IT department to recognize, and I'm just an attorney, the value of that information. And I just want to say, to this wall of shame at the OCR, a lot of those entities are up there through no fault of their own, okay? If you didn't know that.
All right. All right, well, let's move on to number 3, the Internet of Things. Ralph, you want to start with that one?
So the Internet of Things, what is this Internet of Things, right? I think many people know, some people don't. These are traditional devices that can exist without a network, that can exist. They're not computers to start with. They're not cell phones, which are computers nowadays. They are things that traditionally existed that have now been networked. and able to transmit information. For example, right now, from this phone right here, I could open my garage door at home. Garage doors existed before this, but now I could open my garage door, lock my garage door. I could check on the cat feeder if the cats are fed. I could turn lights on. I don't do some of this stuff, but I could turn lights on. This is the Internet of Things. And it presents a risk cybersecurity-wise because a lot of these devices have been retrofitted to be networked by the companies that make them, not by technology companies. So they've been retrofitted to communicate. So the security around that retrofit is often insufficient. And it lacks standards in some ways, so we don't even know how good it is. So Internet of Things is a significant risk. And for this conversation, part of the Internet of Things are a pacemaker that's networked to report on things, a blood pressure monitor, or many other medical devices that I know nothing about. But they are now on a network. And if you're on a network, and that network is connected to the internet, then you're on the internet. You're just a firewall away, usually, or multiple firewalls if done properly. So, so the Internet of Things presents a unique risk in healthcare, and again, where the regulators, I'll leave the regulation to these gentlemen, but they're going to be looking for due diligence around this. Now, you could buy these machines from a tech company, but do technical companies, are they the best producers of medical devices? Or you could buy them from a medical device company, are they the best producers of networked items? And add on top of that, that first to market counts. What do I mean by that? If you developed Angry Birds in your basement and you got it out on April 10th, you're probably a multimillionaire. If you developed really annoyed birds next door and released it on April 11th, you're poor. So security is often the last consideration when building software, when putting software on devices. And the last part of that is, how many people here have updated the software on your home router in the last 6 months? 1, 2, 3, I know Michelle did. 4, because she teaches for me. So, right, did most of you even know that there is software on your home router that has updates for security and that you need to update it regularly? Guess what? IoT devices, all of them, the garage opener, the cat feeder, those all have updates too. And if they can get into your cat feeder on your network, they're now on your network. Same thing happens in hospitals and businesses. John?
I just think that underscores the importance of having the right policies and procedures in your organization, which I'm going to go back to the office and look at that this afternoon. So.
Graham?
Yeah, it's a good point. There's always kind of a struggle between the push for innovation and to be tech forward and the first to market and doing it correctly. So we really value our partners at LCMC that do want to push for innovation, but always do keep us in the loop so we can do it correctly.
Yeah, maybe not so much the Internet of Things, but if you go back to the huge Equifax breach, whatever that was, 4 years ago, whatever, that was coming in through the HVAC system, some device, right? Guys make great HVAC systems, but didn't have a lot of security, right? And then they ended up being coupled into the network. Okay, let's move on now to, what we all see, right, and the future, and the future's been here a while, right, which is migration to the cloud. Graham, you want to start?
Yeah, it's a big trend. It's something that, again, we want our business associates to be aware of. I will highlight another event that we did have, and we did have a great business associate agreement in place with this vendor. This vendor actually did experience an exfiltration of their data, and they were responsible for notifying the patients and any costs involved. So this was an example of having a great business associate. Thankfully, we were under the 500 patient threshold, because that would have been 2 Wall of Shame posts for the same organization in the same calendar year. But it's a huge move to cloud migration, and everyone's getting there. Healthcare has definitely adopted it. A lot of our Epic functions do exist on the cloud, and with that carry inherent risks with having PHI on a cloud. If there's not adequate security measures in place, we could potentially experience huge breaches to not only our patients but also our employees. So having adequate IT security measures in place with cloud migration is something that should be at the utmost importance for any organization.
Yeah, so to add to that, so people say, well, we moved to the cloud, we're safe. Microsoft knows how to secure data, Google does, right? AWS does, right? But are you connected to that? If your back end of your database is in the cloud and your front end is local, that connection, is that secured? Most cloud breaches come on the user side. Not properly, the security's not, so you still need expertise in your organization to make sure that you are secure in your communications with the cloud. Unless, of course, everything is sent over the public internet, which is not the situation you want. So if you have a point-to-point connection to your cloud provider, more expensive, more secure, if you have that, then what's the security look on your side of that equation? Because that's where they'll be coming for you.
And just a mention about Epic, if you're in the healthcare space, you know who they are. This used to be a little company out of Madison, Wisconsin now, and they're at, I know Ochsner's on Epic. I don't know, is LCMC?
Every single one of our hospitals as of this year is on Epic.
Is on
so.
Epic, and so they are a player, and I'm not here pushing anybody's product. I mean, they have competition too. But the point is, you can go to the annual Epic conference up in Madison, and they have all sorts of panels on HIPAA, on these issues that we're talking about today. So it isn't as if the vendors and everybody in the space, they're not, it's not like they're not aware of it. They're trying very hard to solve it, right? So they want to be a partner with you and help, but there are issues. So it's interesting that if you ever really want to see what's going on, I'm not Epic or one of their competitors, go to their annual conference. It's very interesting.
And just to, as an example, if you go to AWS's website, and I'm not shilling for them or anything, or marketing, but they have northwards of 150 products that they hold out as, I don't want to say HIPAA compliant, but that they'll execute a business associate agreement with, basically healthcare related products. So, the vendors are very attuned to this, and so I give that as an example, because there's a lot more, I think it was over 150 products that they have.
And there's different types of agreements, right? I mean, there's a multi-tenancy cloud, or there's a dedicated cloud for your organization. Obviously, the more secure one is probably the dedicated one. And so.
All right. Well, let's move on now to number 5, the governance holistic approach, and then we have NIST and HIPAA model. Let's take the first part, and John, I'll let you start with this one, the governance and holistic approach to HIPAA.
Right. It goes without saying, you need to be very well aware of if you're an organization regulated by, say, an industry like insurance. 15 states now have the insurance data security law that was promulgated by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And it very much, like I said, mirrors HIPAA in their requirements, including basically an encryption safe harbor. And of course, our state database breach notification laws, all of that in addition to HIPAA. But as I think in particularly the insurance industry, I think you're going to see a migration towards the NIAC model law in the rest of the states, because there's 3 pending right now in legislatures. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think HIPAA has been around for a while. It's not going anywhere, but we are entering into a world where Ray just alluded to. We have Epic, we have Cerner. There's a push for a singular medical record to increase the patient or continuity of care for patients. So I hope, as we move forward into the future, that we'll be able to partner with the individuals that are making the regulations, so we can really harmonize protecting patient privacy, but also meeting the best needs of the patient wherever that may be.
Yeah, I would just add, it's important for businesses of any size, from the smallest to the largest, to have a plan. Because every organization is somewhat different. And that plan should be driven towards increasing the cybersecurity, just information technology maturity of your organization. That doesn't mean that if you're a two-person business and and you have an app in the cloud and that you should be spending $1 million a year. There's a right-sized fit for everybody, but the idea is to get incrementally better by looking at your capability model. And these things exist, they're out there, there's multiple NIST, you get it from NIST, you can get it from others, but follow along with that repeatable increase in maturity in your process and governance. That will drive the right technical solutions as well. As you rise to meet the risk, it will drive your response to it. So whatever size organization you are, you can't just ignore this stuff. I mean, these type of things are always filled with doom and gloom. Somebody said to me, well, if your database is encrypted, they won't be able to get in your database. And my cryptology instructor is here today, but she stepped out. But at the end of the day is they can take an encrypted database today, exfiltrate it to China, and then wait for the technology to make brute forcing that encryption a couple of seconds. If you get quantum computing, you'll be able to brute force an encrypted data, today's encryption, and probably in seconds, right? So it's all doom and gloom, but the idea is to make your business as hard as possible to breach and to show that you did that due diligence if you should get breached. So this governance can't be overstated, and that's why in both my master's courses and my undergraduate courses, in the Bachelor of Science or the Master of Science, we don't just talk about technical solutions. Yeah, go ahead, construct a firewall, but also know why you're doing it, how it contributes to the overall posture, how do you document that, what's the governance plan, what risk does it mitigate, and which risk does it not mitigate as you weigh those. So we try to teach our students the full range of these things. So your businesses should be leveraging this type of best practice at whatever level you're at, the right size fit.
Yeah, I mean, when HIPAA came out in the 70s, in many ways, if you look back, it was sort of the maverick for the way it approached it, both in terms of providing some protections that weren't there before, but also in its approach. Its approach was, two dentists in an office have a very different threat vectors and model as opposed to LCMC, which has 6 hospital systems, right? You have to assess, and everything in between are larger or smaller, right? And so HIPAA's approach was, the first thing you need to do is assess all your risks, come up with your plan. And you have to document all that, right? It doesn't matter if you did it if you don't document it and then execute it and then put your plan in place and train and then rinse and repeat, right? You got to just keep doing that. And that was the HIPAA model, which was new. I mean, it was the novel approach to it maybe. And that really has been now adopted. If you look around other privacy laws, right, that's sort of what you see if you look at the NIST framework, right? I don't know if any of y'all want to comment on any of that?
Well, I just wanted to say regarding HIPAA, I mean, the omnibus legislation gave it real teeth. So expect to see future cybersecurity requirements have more government teeth involved. You can get
John.
Yeah,
John. Yeah.
and just if you were subjected to an audit by the OCR, you probably are well aware that you have a window of time to respond to it. And if you don't have these policies and procedures and documentation and all in place, then is not, if that were to happen, is not the time to prepare that. I mean, so just to be aware of that.
Yeah, to that point, when we do get a request to review a OCR complaint from a patient, they request everything. It's your written policies and procedures. They want to see that they've been reviewed and revised. They want to see your live education numbers. So we want to have documented sign-in sheets that, we had 2,500 employees in this calendar year receive live training. And then they want to see your investigative file. So hopefully you'd have a centralized database excuse me, where you'd have all of your notes and the steps you took to investigate the complaint, because you don't want to be at the 11th hour up against a timeline digging through old saved Word documents on your desktop. So having these procedures in place sets you up for success when you do face an OCR investigation.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Q&A now, because we promised that, unless anyone closing, just like one sentence, anybody got a closing thought? Okay,
Just real simple, really simply is that you are a target. If you're on a network, because let me ask a question of the audience, right? If you had a $10,000 door with a $2 lock, what's your security worth? Anybody? $2, right? So while you yourself may not be a prime target for people to go after, you may connect through somebody else who may connect to. And with these advanced, persistent cybersecurity threats and attacks, you may be in that chain that makes you very desirable for even a nation state. Well, what does Russia or China or Iran or North Korea have to do with my dentist practice on Poitras? Everything if one of your patients is somebody who's a target of theirs. They might use your data to social engineer that real target. Maybe one of your patients is somebody that they're looking at, really. So everybody needs to take these steps. I think we've heard that over and over today. So I'm
that's
interested in your
great, that's great. John, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I think yesterday the president said, with regards to a potential cyber attack from Russia, it's not if, it's when. So, you always have to be mindful of anything you do, whether it be electronic or on any kind of infrastructure. So, yeah, it's definitely a crazy situation and world we're in.
And I think it's pretty well known that PHI is more sought after now than PII by hackers, more valuable.
All right, and with that, we'll open it up to Q&A. Anybody got a question? We have a microphone. Jules can bring you the mic. Here we go.
I feel like I can say this in this environment where ISO 27K certified, have been since 2018. So I'm very familiar with the policies and the procedures and the constant due diligence. Our biggest headache and struggle is not all of that. It's making sure that the saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link, that our weakest links are strong. So we're signing contracts with clients saying that we're going to pass along whatever we have agreed to with them onto our subs, and then it's finding subs that can do the work for the price, do a quality job, but also meet these contractual obligations and the data security obligations. And it's a full-time job for this lady to do and keep track of all that all the time. But at some point, you can't call up your vendors and police them. And you can't ask for things like, did you do a background check on every single person? They'll check the box, but you don't know if they really did it. And I was thinking about you with LCMC. Like, how are you dealing with all those vendor those business associate agreements, and monitoring that they're really doing what they're saying they're doing?
Yeah, it's definitely it'll keep you up at night, especially in terms of, you alluded to it, the subcontractors. So we do try. I mean, we do have processes hardwired into our contract origination and renewal process that notify us that we do send a VAA questionnaire out, or an IT vendor questionnaire out, and we won't renew the contract until they actually will fill that out, and we have it in our our centralized contract database. But yeah, with regard to subcontractors, it is very difficult to hold our vendors to that standard. That if you have a subcontractor that has a breach or employs somebody that's on an exclusions list, you need to notify us promptly, and we need to remedy that. But yeah, it's that we've taken big steps by just kind of hardlining those measures into the renewal process. But if the term of the agreement is 5 years, that renewal process, you may be in the dark for 5 years before you get to kind of touch base with that particular vendor again.
You said exclusion employee list, that's not that's not in our contract.
Yeah, if you want to connect after this, we actually have a a vendor. We've recently contracted with them. They provide ongoing excluded individual screenings for us. So if we do have, somebody that may be a nurse practitioner or an MA that all of a sudden comes up on an OIG exclusions list because they've done something illegal, we get a notification, that following Monday, where we're able to speak with that individual and then potentially separate from them, because we don't want to be in a situation to ever having employed anyone that's on an exclusions list.
So I'm in the insurance industry, and I look at the world through my own little myopic view, but I would address your challenge by requiring your contractors and your vendors through a contractual obligation to provide a certificate of insurance. If they're providing a certificate of insurance and they're carrying cyber liability, as previous speakers have already noted, they're going to be required to have taken a lot of very similar steps to what you would demand for them to have and want them to have from a cybersecurity standpoint, or they wouldn't be able to secure the coverage. And you can require them to have specific limits, just like you would with any other insurance coverage, and they're going to have an annual renewal, which means if you're requiring a certificate of insurance on an annual basis and they're able to maintain the coverage, it would take I would think, and I'm not the attorney, but it would take it an extra step and make sure that those who are your vendors and your vendors' subcontractors are in compliance with a certain amount of security protocols.
And going back to the gentleman from Gallagher, if y'all were here for that, I did ask him a question afterwards outside. At what point is your cyber insurer going to ask about your vendors' cyber insurers and their insurance levels? I think we're starting to see that. It's right. So just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that's by requiring your subcontractor to have the cyber insurance, it's kind of a shortcut to saying that they've taken at least perfunctory due diligence around securing their networks. Listen, when that Target hack, which was a huge hack some years ago, they didn't get Target. They got an integrated vendor of targets and then hopped in, right? So again, only as strong as your weakest link, the $2 lock on the door. Basically, you could force your vendors to meet a certain specification before doing business with them, and you could also technically have a risk-based approach on this. They may not get full access, or they may be firewalled off. The part that integrates with your vendor may be firewalled off from the rest of your network, so they can't infiltrate and then hop to somewhere else to get patient data or whatever. So again, it's imperative that you take these steps to make sure the people you do business with meet this minimum standard of security, because your network now is dependent upon this integrated system from a subcontractor or a vendor or somebody.
Thank you. And Tim, thank you. Those are great comments and great questions. Thank you. We only have a minute here, and if you can answer this, fine. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine too. So this issue of getting insurance in your BAA agreements, right? What kind of amounts? Like, what are you looking for? What are the ranges, or what are you typically asking for coverage from your vendors? Just curious. How much?
I would think it should mirror what your organization's insurance, it should be consistent with that level is.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a victim of ransomware, I think the payouts are astronomical. $500,000's not unusual, $1 million's not unusual. So then that doesn't include the cost of recovering legal fees and so on and so forth, and the time lost in your business where you were down while you tried to recover from this. So that's going to be you're going to need a kind of an inflated policy to deal with all those things and to get back up and running.
And I think Joey Sylvester might have said this, and Tim would say it too. Your CGL policy is not built for cyber. It's just the square peg and the round hole. You need to go get a cyber. That's old news, right? And you need your cyber policy yesterday. Go ahead, Graham, I'm sorry.
It depends on the vendor, but typically we try and request at least 1 million to 3 million in coverage. But with the world we're kind of entering into that's been outlined earlier, it's getting difficult to hold vendors to that standard because they're having difficulty receiving that kind of coverage.
Yeah, yeah. So in some sense, that means you've got you're naked on some of that, right?
No comment.
Right, yeah. Okay. All right, well, I think that we're here. Any more? I'll just squeeze it here. Anybody got another question for the panel? Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Graham and John and Ralph. It was wonderful. Thank you.